Well, good evening and welcome to the History Sessions episode 4. I did just pause there for a moment. Just wanted to make sure that everybody could hear me. Hopefully you can. We know we've got lots of people watching because we've had lots of people comment already. And we're here with episode 4 and we're hosting Mr. Ivan Bunn, local author, historian and legend. And we've actually been here for the past 3 Monday evenings, and Ivan has been bringing you some fascinating information about the history of Lowestoft and Waveney and Suffolk and beyond, in actual fact. So, if you are watching, please click share. That will certainly help us to reach more people, hopefully, who can enjoy the talk. And we'd love to know what you would like to know about. So, Ivan has very graciously said that he'd be happy to take questions, and so far he's taken lots of questions over the last 3 weeks, and we've been finding out some fascinating information as a result of that. But so we're actually here, and Ivan is going to join us very shortly. But I will just mention a few things I need to do, a little bit of boring housekeeping, and that is, I guess, to say that we're actually funded by a wonderful organisation called the People's Health Trust, and they have a fund called Active Communities. And as a result of that, we have been running a project called the Unique Coastal Cultural and Musical Heritage of Waveney, the Rogue Shanty Chorus. And this project encapsulates several kind of themes. One of them in particular is a shanty chorus, an authentic fishing choir, who usually meet weekly. And as a result of the lockdown, the COVID-19 pandemic, we've found that we actually are not able to rehearse. And so in lieu of that, we started to do some virtual rehearsals, and which kind of evolved fairly quickly into broadcasts. And then off the back of that, we had been talking to Ivan about doing some history sessions with us anyway. And off the back of that, we didn't let lockdown stop us involving Ivan. And so just through the wonders of technology, we're bringing you Ivan. So I think I don't need to say much more, really. I think I'm going to bring Ivan on full screen. Can you hear me all right, Ivan?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much.
Lovely job.
So, Ivan, we did kind of trail. We did do a bit of a trail of what you were going to be talking about, but maybe you could just let anybody know who's only just tuned in, who might not have seen that.
Okay, yeah, it's in loosely. It's a follow-on from what I talked about last week at one point at the beginning. If you didn't hear the story last week, you haven't. This will still make perfect sense to you. Last week there was the 355th anniversary of the Battle of Lowestoft that took place on the 3rd of June, 1665. So I talked a little bit about the battle. One of the famous admirals of Lowestoft, who was involved in it, some pictures of him, etc., etc. Then I went on to talk about the fact that Samuel Pepys, the famous diarist in London, recorded on that same day that he could hear the sound of the guns of the Battle of Lowestoft in London, as could many other people. Then it suddenly occurred to me that 3 days later, Pepys met the first victims, or heard about the first victims of that huge pandemic of the plague that broke out in June 1665. And I've been reading through that, and I realised that the parallels to the things he was writing, his emotions, his feelings, his experiences, as more and more people were taken away by this dreadful plague in London, were so paralleled with what we're going through at the moment in our current situation. So that was kind of a spin-off from the Battle of Lowestoft in 1665. I thought what I would do tonight, the first part, it's not going to be too long. I hope it's going to work. I thought it would be interesting to go back again to Lowestoft in 1665. Forget about the battle. That's come and gone. The battle was only 40 miles to the east of the town, and if you could hear the guns in London, God knows how noisy it was for the population of Lowestoft. So I thought I'd spend 15 minutes plus or minus with the help of maps, explaining what Lowestoft was like in 1665, because 17th century Lowestoft was a totally different place to the Lowestoft we know today. So that's what I intend to do. Then take a few questions if anybody's got any. I followed up that Peep's Diary material last week at a request, in actual fact, the history of Sparrow's Nest in Lowestoft. I did the first half of that last week, and I'm going to do the second half of that this evening, which then hopefully at the end will give opportunity for more questions. It's fairly open-ended. Obviously, I can't talk till this time tomorrow night, although some people I probably could. But so that's how the evening is going to pan out, hopefully. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you find it interesting. This is the fourth one. I'm getting a little bit more comfortable with it. As many of you might know, I do a lot of public speaking, presentations, talks, lectures and walks. It's really weird for me to be sitting here looking at myself on a tiny screen without an audience. I find that surreal to say, but I'm growing up now. I think I can hack it. So anyway, once again, anybody who's just now, welcome. And there will be a slight pause after before I do the presentation, because the technology I've got here is pretty low tech. So I'd have to take my little pod thing that I've got, and I have to move it slightly and put it in front of the screen of my laptop, and then run the presentation from there. It worked well. I think Stephen agreed as well last week. So yep. Fingers crossed, no problems this week. So there is a slight then when it looks as if there's an earthquake because I move everything. Okay, right. That's what I would like to do.
Well, so Ivan, you say about the audience not being there, and I know what you mean. If it just feels like you're talking to a screen, which is a bit discombobulating. But Dick Houghton says, "We are here, Ivan. Certainly the audience is there." And then Andy Marr says, "Good evening." Sue Day says, "Hi all." Carly Franklin says, "Hello, Stephen and Ivan." Paul Haylock says, "Looking forward to a great session with Ivan tonight." Jackie Draper says, "Evening all." David Wood says, "Good evening from the Woods household," and the list goes on. There's lots of people out there watching. Chris Collins from Galston. Yeah, we're looking forward to this, and certainly there are people out there. So it's hopefully it'll be a very enjoyable, and I'm sure it will.
Yeah, don't want to single people out, but I say hi to Dick. I hope we're all okay now, mate. And Chris and Galston, welcome. Hopefully in the not too distant future I should be able to come to another one of your moots, but right, here we go then. We'll make a start. I should explain, I'm putting these maps up on the screen. I'll tell you a little bit about the maps. I'll put the maps up and then you won't have to look at me. We'll put the first map up. I hope they're clear enough. If you've got small screens, they might not be particularly legible. Anyway, let's try and see. This is all an experiment. Right, so this is the first map. This is a map of the parish of Lowestoft. It's dated 1618, but the town didn't change much for the best part of 200 years. And this is the parish of Lowestoft. And you can see, I hope, the red line. Let's just explain what you're looking at. You've got Lake Lothing along the bottom of the map. You'll notice there's no harbour there. It's landlocked and it's called the Fresh Water. You've got the parish boundary, in actual fact, is just to the south of Lake Lothing. Nick a little bit of Berkeley and Carlton Colville. Then it runs through almost to Muckford Bridge. And then there's a large bit of Alton that sticks like a needle into the backside of the parish of Lowestoft. Then we go up almost right up as far as Blunderston, then down the A12 through Gunton and then there is what must be a very artificial boundary off to the east. It's east northeast in actual fact, I would imagine, cutting across the Denes to the North Sea, which at that time was called the German Ocean. The information from this map, I've dated it 1618. I worked very, very closely with my great friend and colleague, fellow historian David Butcher. We discovered in the archives at Lowestoft, or he did in actual fact, a complete survey of the manor and town of Lowestoft dated 1618. And it is in Latin. Unfortunately, David can translate the Latin. He translated it and we worked together. We found on a map of 1832, a detailed map of the parish, we found that about 25% of the fields in 1832 were identifiable in the 1618 descriptions. So we plotted them, and then working outwards, we were slowly able to build up this map of the town, of the parish. And as you can see, I hope, you can see the first roads that you can see to the north of the freshwater, Lake Lothing. That's now Norwich Road and Bevan Street, taking you up to Rotterdam Road, taking you up on then when you travel north, you come to the corner where Lowestoft Cemetery now is, and if you go to the left, Normanston Drive, you're going to the right, you're on St. Peter's Street, which will swing you back just as it does today to the south end of the town. To the north of that, across Church Green, you have the lane that's taking you through to St. Margaret's Church. St. Margaret's Church is almost slap bang in the middle of the map. St. Margaret's Road back then was known as the Church Lane for obvious reasons. And you can see right in the middle of the map, just to the southeast of St. Margaret's Church, is the large Church Green. Leading from that is what's now Alton Road, which will take you eventually up onto Alton Road, coming out, Somerleyton Road, coming out at the Four Crossways by the High House at Alton. So the structure of the roads is fairly the same as it is now. It's kind of skeleton in which the whole thing hangs around. All of the brown areas is arable land. We've got other types of land there. There's common land. There's common land that, in actual fact, if I look closely at it, that's kind of striped. That's common land where the Lord of the Manor has fenced off strips of. It's called brewery. This is being let by the Lord of the Manor with permission, his permission, for people to usually to graze animals on it. So you can see the most of the town is arable. The grey area, that little slither of grey to the east, to the northeast of the whole area, that's the extent of the whole town of Lowestoft. So you can see it's quite agriculturally, it's a very busy place. And the records show that certainly in the 17th century, there were more farm workers and husbandmen and farmers living in Lowestoft than there were fishermen. We were fishing off the North Denes, below the cliff. There was no beach village at that time. That's not going to start being built, if you like, or evolving until about 130 years after this map and survey was drawn. So the Common Denes, that's where the boats are launched from. That's where the nets are dried. That's where boats are built. That's where all the paraphernalia of the fishing industry took place, although industry is perhaps too strong a word. And I don't know if you can see too clearly, but certainly in many places there are little tiny strips marked out by dots. These are the remains of the medieval field systems. Most of the medieval field systems have been enclosed into much bigger systems, but some of the strips still exist. So that's really, there's Skammock Heath, where we get Skammock Crescent from. We've got Drake's Heath down the bottom to the north of the fresh water, right to the top end and the northeast where that straight parish boundary is. That's the North End Common, which eventually would be enclosed and become fields. You notice there's very, very few woods there, apart from the very northwest bit of the parish. There's 2 woods there. They are in actually the ancient manor of Akethorpe, which was incorporated into Lowestoft in fairly early on in the medieval times. And interestingly enough, Ake is the old English, possibly Scandinavian word for the oak, and a thorp is a lesser settlement to a larger one. The larger one, of course, being Lowestoft, toft meaning a settlement or a farm. So you can see echoed in the place names here the Scandinavian origins of Lowestoft. That's enough about the parish. If we can flip to the next map, this is the town of Lowestoft at the same time. Again, this 1618 manor survey was so detailed that we were able to basically put most of the houses back into their original plots. So running from north all the way down the centre of the map, you've got what's now Yarmouth Road up by the North End Common, which would become Bellevue Park. You're coming down through the High Street, all the way down through the High Street, just as you can today. The road's going off to the west, to your left as you look at the map. So we've got Swan Lane, which would become Mariner Street, and you've got the various streets that are leading off to the west. Then you come down to the old marketplace, and that's where St. Peter's Street now is, joins up with High Street. Then you continue down what is Old Nelson Street today. The one street that's missing off there, obviously, is London Road North. That wasn't laid out until 1785, 120 odd years after 1665. And then you travel due south. So the southern end, right at the very bottom of the map, if you could superimpose a map of today there, that's where the very large roundabout at the bottom of Old Nelson Street is. And you could swing round just as you could in the 17th century into Watlow Road, which runs along the foot of the cliff back then, just as it does today. Just about every building along the foot of the cliff is a fish house or a smokehouse or a storehouse, and next door associated with the fishing. And the population, again, my mate David Butcher has done a wonderful amount of work on this, a demographic study through Cambridge University, and using the parish registers, etc. He's calculated that probably in the mid-17th century, the complete total population of Lowestoft, men, women, and children, was a little under, somewhere between 1,800 and 2,000 men, women, and children. That's the total population of the town. And so the built-up area really extends from where present-day St Margaret Road hits the High Street. If you draw a line diagonally down to, if you're familiar with St Margaret's Plain and the first and last pub, draw a line there. Draw another line down to the bottom of Old Nelson Street. You've got a triangle with the Deans to the west. That is where 95% of the townspeople are living. Most of them are living on the east side of the High Street, and most of them are more wealthy merchants with their fish houses and storehouses at the foot of the cliff. And the artisans, the poorer people, are living in more or less in the back streets. Again, I don't know how well you can see the map yourselves there. I've got a large printed copy in my hand, so it's not a problem for me. In that High Street, which is what, a third of a mile, half a mile at the very longest, there are in fact 8 public houses, 8 inns. There's a slaughterhouse, there's a barn, there's tanneries, there's malt houses, there's breweries, there's a smithy, there's even a little lighthouse, which is almost at the top of present-day Mariner Score at that time, 2 or 3 ponds, orchards. So, excuse me. So as you can see, it's a really, really self-contained town, and everybody there probably knew everybody else's business. So that's the town. So if we just go on to my next map, which is a combination of the both, as I say, I'm going to keep this fairly short. The other question that I've been asked from time to time, if I just get my other notes here, where are we? There we go. So you've got a town. It's an organised town. It's had a marketplace there since the year 1304. The charter for a market was renewed in 1445. It's got policemen, constables. It's got people running the place. It has to. A town doesn't subsist in a vacuum. So they didn't back then, fortunately, have a district council of any sort. They had a piecemeal form of, I suppose loosely you could call it, government. And again, that's very complicated, the way the town was run. But just to give you an idea, and this is only to give you an idea, how was the town and parish managed? Well, I'll go quickly through the people who were doing this and what their jobs would basically be. So we start off with the church. The church, St Margaret's Church, with the vicar and curate, played a big part in the management of the town up to a point, particularly for ecclesiastical affairs. At the top of the list were 2 church wardens. One was appointed by the vicar every year, and one was elected by the parishioners. So you've got 2 church wardens, and their job was to, first of all, oversee the repair and maintenance of the nave of the church and the tower. Not the chancel. The vicar had to look after the chancel, the highest sanctum of the church, but the church wardens had to look after the church nave and the tower. We had 2 almshouses for the poor people in the town. Their job was to oversee the almshouses were in good repair and looked after. There was also 3 public wells in the town. These again had to be under the watchful eye of the church wardens. Interestingly enough, they oversaw the maintenance of the scores. Again, I'm sure most of you from around here know what the scores are. If you don't, I'm surprised. But if you've got anybody from further away, the scores are narrow pathways leading from the high street to the low ground below the cliff. And they're there today. They've been there ever since there's been a town. They're quite a fairly unique feature of this little stretch of coast here, particularly at Lowestoft. They were for drainage purposes at points. They got blocked and there was heavy rain. This high street would flood. So the church wardens oversaw the maintenance of the scores. They ensured that the deans and the common land that I mentioned, there was the big church green was the biggest one, were kept well drained, and any fences on them were kept in repair. And they also had to ensure that the boundary markers were properly maintained. So that's the church wardens, and the vicar obviously looked after the spiritual side of things for the population, marrying people, burying people, baptizing people. Under the vicar, well, not literally, but working with the vicar, was the parish clerk. He looked after the administration of the church. He kept the upkeep of the parish registers and the day-to-day affairs of the church. There was the sexton. He again came under the vicar. His job was to maintain the churchyard, and he was also the gravedigger. The vicar appointed a vestry. That's a committee. Annually, there was a committee called the parish vestry, and this is common in all parishes at this time. In fact, we still, I think, have vestry meetings today in some churches. It was an open vestry, probably of about 8 to 10 people. It was open, meaning that the parishioners voted who on the parish vestry, and they had to elect, or the victor would appoint 4 overseers of the poor. Their job was to go around and collect the poor rates. If you owned property, you had to have pay a poor rate, which was calculated on the previous years, how much money was going to be needed to support the poor. 4 overseers of the poor. They only worked for 3 months, and then the next one took over. They would be responsible for keeping the accounts, how much they'd collected and from whom and when they paid, and also their disbursements, how much was being paid out to support the poor in the town. And there was 2 surveyors of highways. Their job, they were appointed by the vestry, their job was to keep an eye on the roads and highways and byways within the town and the parish, and to make certain that they were kept in good repair. If they weren't, obviously the surveyors didn't do it. They would employ men to mend the highways of the town. Interestingly enough, again, if you know Lowestoft, they had a pit, the parish pit, full of gravel and sand, which was designated for this purpose. That parish pit is still there today. If you go along Dormiston Drive, it's just before you come to Lakeland Drive on your left-hand side, if you're travelling out of Lowestoft, there is quite a large pit there, and at some time it's kind of been landscaped a little bit. That's actually the parish pit. Yes, it's actually marked on the parish map as well. So that's the parish pit where the materials to repair the highways would come from. Now, of course, Lowestoft was a manor. It had been a manor. There was a lord of the manor. Never lived in Lowestoft. He was probably the lord of a couple of dozen manors all over the country. All he was interested in was the income. And there was the manor court was held. This comprised of the steward. He was the man who was actually acting on behalf of the lord of the manor. The bailiff, who had to make certain that everything was, the manorial lands were being looked after, because a lot of those fields and the town plots actually belonged to the lord of the manor, and they had to pay rents and fines on them. And then there was a jury that sat at the manor court. The jury was known as the homage or homage, and there were 35 areas in Lowestoft which were known as chief tenements. They all had names, and if you happened to be a tenant or owned one of these chief tenements, you had to sit on the manor court when it was convened. these people were actually known as chiefers, which I think is the right word, and they were responsible for collecting the rents from a designated area round their chief tenement, probably 12 to 16 acres. So they had to pay it themselves. If there were small plots there as well, they had to make sure that the money was collected and then delivered to the bailiff, who would do the accounts, and these would then be passed on to the steward, who would then pass them on to the money would eventually get to the lord of the manor. There were two courts. There was the court baron. This met whenever there was business to be conducted, and we in the Lowestoft record office. Unfortunately, they won't be there much longer because they're gone down to Ipswich. The manor court records, the manor court books, well, I think they start from 1580 and they go through to 1926 with only one short break in them. And you can see by going through those that the court baron, as it was called, met almost monthly, sometimes even more than that. Whenever there was business to be conducted, they dealt with the changes of ownership of property that belonged to the manor. Now, I'm not going to go into manorial records because that's a complex subject in its own. But so you've got that manor court, and then you've got, they could also deal with small claims, like the small claims court, where people had complaints against somebody who owed them money or broken a fence. They could listen to these claims as long as they didn't exceed 40 shillings. Then they had to go to a magistrate's court. So this is the court baron, which met fairly regularly. Every year, annually, in the first Sunday of Lent, there was another court held before the court baron. This was called the court leet. This is, in some respects, the more important one. It dealt with misdemeanors, nuisances, antisocial behaviour, and it also appointed the officers of the town. 4 constables were appointed. These are all unpaid, by the way. 4 constables were appointed. Some good jobs going if you want them. 2 ale tasters were appointed. Their job was to go down around the breweries in the town and check that the ale was up to the standard laid down by law. There was 2 leather searchers. Their job was to make certain that the leather that was being produced in the tanneries was of the quality laid down by law again, and if not, take measures to rectify it. 2 swine reeves. Their job was to look after the pigs. Pigs are very good at rooting in the ground and learn lots of damage. Their job basically was to make sure the pigs were kept well penned in their sties, and also that they had the mandatory ring in their nose so that they couldn't dig into the soil too much. And 2 people called afforators. Their job was to determine how much people should be fined if they were caught creating a nuisance or a misdemeanor and brought before the court leet. And now all of these people, because of their position, came from the middle to upper classes of the gentry of Lowestoft, people who could read and write and carried a little bit of authority. At the court leet, when you go through the records, there's some wonderful cases that have been brought in the 17th century, all sorts of antisocial behaviour. Everybody in Lowestoft was responsible for keeping the street outside their house well paved. If not, they'd be taken to the court and fined. We get cases where there's one particular case that I recall, a butcher who had a butchery at the top of the rank score in Lowestoft. He was fined in the court leet for throwing severed sheep's heads down rank score so that they blocked a drain at the side of the score. People were fined for trivial things like leaving a ladder standing in the street, leaving the cellar door from the street. There are some in the high street today. There are some cellars of the houses, especially on the east side of the high street, where the cellar door actually opens into the pavement. People were fined for not keeping them in repair or leaving them open to the detriment of the public. Those court leak records are absolutely fascinating. A few cases of didn't deal with what I call real crime, murders, theft. Those went up to a higher court. They dealt with the little bits, guys having a scrap in the street, they'd be fined for disorderly conduct. People were fined for allowing gambling to go on in their public houses, again, contrary to the rules of the manor, etc., etc., etc. So, and the people who were appointed, and they're not elected, they're appointed to be a constable, an ale taster, leather searcher, etc., etc. They weren't paid, and if they refused to do the work, take on the post, then they were very, very heavily fined. The great and the good. Those of you, Sir Thomas Allen, who became a hero of the Battle of Lowestoft, had a house, I think it was 2930, what's now 2930, the High Street, Lowestoft. He was at nearly every court being fined because he didn't keep the path outside his house in good repair. And he was fined about 9p in old money. And he basically just said, because he could afford it, pays the fine. And next year he's back at being fined because he still hasn't done anything about the pavement outside his house. So this is the way the system worked. And to all intents and purposes, it must have worked well, and certainly well into the late 18th century. The court leet, the last met, I think, in 1770. The court baron, which was dealing with the ownership of property, was finally abolished in 1926. In actual fact, the room that I'm sitting in now, in my lounge, was once a plot of land measuring 17 feet by 19 feet. And I can trace its history of this plot, and it's not an exciting history, back right through to the early 1600s. And it's usually referred to a plot of land measuring 17 feet by 19 feet with a building thereon erected, but it doesn't tell me what the building was. And in actual fact, my lounge is 17 feet by 19 feet. So there's continuity there. If you want to look at Manor Court records, and I'll look at my watch because I think it's time I wind this little section up because I've got more stuff to do. If you want to look at the Manor Court records, as I said, they're kept at Lowestoft, but I don't think they're going to be for shame. I can say that because I don't work there anymore. For shame, they won't be available in Lowestoft anymore. They're going down to Ipswich, but they contain such a wealth of information. The problem is that before 1734, they're all written in Latin. They changed to English in 1734, but prior to that, they're in Latin. So if your command of Latin's not very good, then you aren't going to have a lot of luck there, I'm afraid, unless you can get somebody who can read the Latin. Right, I'm going to leave it there. I've really boiled this down to the lowest common denominator. Oh, here I'm back again. Right. What I would recommend, if you're really interested in the detail of what's going on in Lowestoft in that century, I would recommend, and I might do this every time, I would recommend you obtain a copy of my colleague David Butcher's wonderful, wonderful book, which is the most comprehensive history of Lowestoft from 1550 to 1750. It's called Lowestoft 1550 to 1750, Development and Change in a Suffolk Coastal Town. And David, it's a wonderful book, and David worked on primary source material. Just about everything that he writes in here is based on documentary evidence. If he can't find absolutely primary source material, he will tell you this is based on what I've been able to find. I'm not certain if it's actually I've interpreted it right, but I would really, really, really recommend that to you. The section on manor court and procedures in here, I think, and the management of the town, I think it runs to about 15 pages of detail with examples of people's crimes they were committing, with money that has been paid to the poor. So I would really, really recommend that to you. I've not really done the subject justice. I could have done, but you'd all fell asleep, I know. So anyway, if there's any questions want to pop up, we'll go to that. Then I'll have a drink of water, and then we'll get on with the second half of the history of Sparrow's Nest, if you're all happy with that.
Yeah, so Ivan, actually, there's quite a few comments, so mostly encouraging, well, all encouraging. The first one is from Dick saying, very interesting 1618 map. Bridget Allender says, very interesting to listen to. Karen Harris says, and I agree with Karen, actually, I never knew about the pit, often wondered what that was. So now both Karen and me know. Yeah. Then we've got a few more comments. Michael Rudd says, hi all, this is my first visit. Well, Michael, you're very welcome to be with us. And there's 3 previous talks that Ivan has given, which you can still see on Watch Again on this same channel. So hope you're enjoying it. And yeah, please do feel free to watch the other ones as well. And then we've also got a gentleman called Keith Turner, and he says, good evening from Camberley in Surrey, Keith and Ann Turner. And then Dick again says, lots of new insights for me. I missed some earlier talks. Perhaps Ivan could explain a bit about the business of the town. Well, we wonder what the business of the town might be. Hazard a guess.
Is that the trade of the town? What was going on in the way of shops and businesses and what have you?
Well, he's just put business of the town. So maybe, Dick, maybe you could clarify. Do you mean the trade of the town, or do you mean what was the town up to? Ivan, I wonder also, could we just ask you to repeat the name of David Butcher's book there?
Yeah.
Or the title, sorry.
Well, yeah. I worked with him on this up to a certain extent. This is primarily David's work. I do quite a lot of the illustrations for it. Right, the book is called Lowestoft. I'll read it out to you. Lowestoft 1550 to 1750.
Yeah.
Subtitle, Development and Challenge in a Suffolk Coastal Town. It's published by Bowdell, I think. Let me just see who the publisher is. Oh, I ought to know, I don't know. Boydell Press, 2008.
Brilliant.
And it's very... There's lots of words, but also there are quite a lot of illustrations and charts and tables in the book, and many of the places that he's researched, and he mentions, particularly in the high street, in that he will actually tell you exactly where that building is today or where it was. So it's not just looking at the past. You can actually tie a lot of what he's writing, especially when it comes to the built environment, I think is the modern word for it, when it comes to identifying it with the built environment today. So it's really worth having. I think it's not particularly cheap. It's £25, I think, and I'm certain that's what it is. But that's, if you're interested in the history of the town, the backstory before they invented the camera, then that's a must for anybody.
Yeah, lovely. Well, a few more comments actually, Ivan. Thank you for that. Dick Houghton says, yes, both really. No harbour, so town traded in beach landings of fish, ?
Yes, that's correct. The boats would, the smaller fishing boats would anchor in the roads between the sandbanks and the beach, where those roads where the channels are deeper, and small ferry boats would then ride out with fish merchants on board who would look at the catch and purchase it. The fish would be ferried back and taken to the fish houses of the merchants who had purchased them. They were the small boat. There were the great boats. By the end of the 17th century, there weren't many of them left. The great boats were much, much bigger, and hence their name. They had a crew of about 15, and they would sail up as far as Iceland, catching mature cod and ling to bring back to Lowestoft. Now, here's a link to that. We've gone off slightly at a tangent. They're now laying out in Lowestoft this new Nest. Is it called Nest Park? Nest Point Park?
Yes, I'm not sure, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, they're laying out there. From the medieval period, they had great coppers, vats there, big ones, which they would get all the cod livers out and boil them up and produce cod liver oil. And they're excavating them, and David Butcher and John Stannard from the Heritage Workshop Centre have discovered that the original trenches that these coppers sat in have been infilled, but they're still discernible, and they're going to become a feature of the park. They're going to, as I understand it, they're going to be, once this lockdown finishes, we're going to be allowed to excavate them and see how deep they were, what was used to fill them, and if there's any archaeological evidence there. And then they're going to, I'm not quite certain whether, I think they're going to actually have a walkway built above them so that you can see these trenches. I'm not too certain on the detail, but these cod and ling, these big cod and ling, would be caught by the great boats that sailed as far as Iceland.
Wow.
So that's the fishing, but you have to bear in mind that certainly fishing, although it was important to the town, agriculture was probably even more important. So when it came to agriculture, to crops, to fish, and to farming, the town was almost completely self-sufficient. There were many small holdings in the town. We call them market gardens today, that were producing, and many people had their own little gardens as well, where they did grew their own vegetables. Yeah. So you've got, and there's a market every Wednesday. There had been, and they had somebody. Another interesting aside, if you're interested in interesting asides, you couldn't just have a market. There was a statute going back to the medieval period that said you could only, no markets must be closer than 8 miles to each other, public markets. Otherwise, they cancel each other out. If you've got too many markets, you've got enough people. So if you look at it here, you've got Great Yarmouth Market, Lowestoft Market, Beccles Market, Southwold Market, and they're all roughly at least 8 miles apart. You're not allowed to have them any closer than that.
Well, there you go. Lovely. So thanks, Ivan, and a few more comments. One from Sean Soanes. He says, "Is the pit known as the Monkey Puzzle at the top of Normanston Park?" And then Karen says, "My friend called it the Monkey Puzzle. She lived Lakeland Drive."
Yeah, that's the same pit. That's the pit was certainly a pit was mentioned there in 1618.
Yeah, wonderful,
and
wonderful.
It's known as the Surveyor's Pit because he was the one that, that's the Surveyor of Highways. He was the one who would be inspecting the roads to make certain they weren't too potholed. He should come to Lowestoft today, perhaps, and sort us out.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then he could authorise labourers in the town, and they would get paid for it, to go there with their carts or their wheelbarrows or whatever, dig out the gravel and the sand, and go to the places on the streets where they were needed. They were particularly keen on keeping the common scores well paved and well drained, simply because they were natural. We've got no drains as such. We haven't got gutters where all the surface water runs away. And if it rains like it did the other afternoon, we're absolutely hammered down. Much of the water would go down the high street, and it would run down the scores onto the Deans below. And they seem to think that's how the scores were formed before there was a town here, just as they do at Gunton on Gunton Cliffs today. You can see how the rain has scoured out these gullies that then become quite useful getting up and down the cliff without climbing through the trees and bushes. So I'm going off at a tangent, because I know there will be a talk if we're spared long enough. I'd like to talk.
Tangents are good, Ivan. Everyone's happy to listen to tangents. Everyone's saying so that's fine.
Yeah, I would like to do another talk based on the history of Lowestoft before the 17th century. What was here? How did the town grow? What was going on in the town? We don't have a tremendous amount of information, but there's enough to build up a picture of life in Lowestoft and how we come to be at loggerheads with Yarmouth back in the year 1209, and we still don't really like each other. No, that's not true. I love my Yarmouth friends now. I could say that my brother lives there. So yeah, there's just so much grist for this mill that it's wonderful, and I feel quite privileged that I've been invited along to talk to you about it.
Well, no, I think the privilege is ours, Ivan, and still lots of lovely comments coming in. And just a reminder, if anyone's joined if anyone hasn't been with us since the beginning of this talk, what are we doing here? Well, we're hosting very well respected local author, historian and legend Ivan Bunn, and this is the fourth session that we've had with Ivan, with three others live stream broadcasts, history talks that have gone out on our Facebook page, the Road Shanty Chorus, and are still available to watch, as this one will be afterwards. You'll be able to watch and share it. And Ivan is just kind of sharing his vast history of the town and Waveney and Suffolk and much more as well. And he's kind of prepared a talk on each session, but very much is informed by some of the questions and comments that are coming in as they do. And actually, Ivan, I wonder if I could pose a question to you, because I was driving around the other day and I saw there is a house on Queen's Road which is kind of fairly near Sparrow's Nest, maybe half a mile as the crow flies. And this house, I've seen it over many years, and I used to live very, very close to it. And at the time, I just thought, it's always struck me that this house doesn't quite look like it should be there. It's very different to the other houses. It looks quite grandiose. And so I took a quick picture on my phone, very bad picture, but I shared it on one of the local Facebook groups and just said, does anybody know, any kind of information or history about this house? And obviously many people said, ask Ivan Bunn. So coincidentally, I'm hosting you for a history session, and it's this house. And what I should have done was got a picture of some other houses on the road, on the street at the same time, because you'd have been able to see. But aside from the fact it's got 3 stories, just the kind of the build and the style and the architecture is very, very different to all the other houses, which are all terraced and very similar two-story houses. So I wonder, I think you might know a little bit about it, but I wonder if you might be willing to share it, because on the Facebook post I put out, there was a lot of interest as well. Many people said, okay, well, I'll comment because I've also seen this and I'm interested too.
Okay, I know, in actual fact, I had to go out for a walk this morning, so I made a point of walking past it. It's quite interesting. If you go around the back, it's this lovely facade is not very deep. It's only the rooms at the very front of the building. At the back, it's just laid out like almost any other terraced house, and it is totally different from the other terraced houses in the street. Again, and I'm sure people who've walked the back streets of Lowestoft or any town notice that these, unless that it's some grandiose scheme, that the plots of land when they were sold to build the houses, a builder might buy 4 plots and build a little terrace, and another builder would come along or someone would come along and buy 1 plot and have a house built there, similar to the one that was already there, but not quite the same. So you get this kind of sort of almost piecemeal type terraces. It's not the same. It's not the same everywhere in Lowestoft. There are places where you can see the street was built at the same time and the houses are identical. Queen's Road and Edinburgh Road were some of the first of the back streets to start to be built in Lowestoft in the second half of the 19th century, as the town was now rapidly expanding westward. And I checked, I've got a map, in fact, I've got it here beside me. It's a map of 1878, which was drawn up by the so-called improvement commissioners in Lowestoft. It's a very, very detailed map, not dissimilar to an Ordnance Survey map. Queen's Road is marked on this map, and the full length of Queen's Road from where it hits Wesley Street all the way up to present day St Margaret's Road, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 houses. There's only 10 houses where we've got continuous terraces today. The northern end of Queen's Road, where this one sits, right at the very top end, is actually shown on there. And it's there's only two other little cottages much further down Queen's Road. It sits there in grand isolation, and the houses to the south of that, the plots of land, appear to be a large garden belonging to this house. And but it's definitely there in 1879. So it's one of the very first properties to be built after Queen's Road was laid out. And I was told many years ago, I can't remember where it came from. This is the map that I've got the information off. And Queen's Road is at the, well, you won't see it anyway. Queen's Road is right at the top there with hardly any houses built. There's Edinburgh, there's Queen's. It's right at the very top there. I don't know whether you can see that, right where my badly chewed fingernail is.
Perfect.
I was told that it was built for quite early on, and we can see that from the map, and it was the home of a pretty wealthy Victorian either boat owner or fish merchant or both. And because at that time there's very few houses built there, I don't know, I've never been up there. I think he would have had a clear view straight away across the end of Edinburgh Road, right the way through to, there's no houses on this map, I don't think, let me have a look. St Margaret's Road, there's no houses on St Margaret's Road. He would have had a complete clear view right the way through to the sea. And that third story, that little turret, square turret bit with a balcony outside, I was told that's where he could stand, and he had a telescope in that room there as well. And he's obviously not spying on the neighbours because there ain't any, but he's almost looking up to sea, watching the vessels. And back at those days, again, we could do something about this in time at some point. We occasionally see a couple of boats or one boat sail past. When the weather was fair and the wind was in the right direction, there would sometimes be up to 50 or 60 vessels going up and down the road, fishing boats, small cargo boats, colliers. And there are some photographs. I've got one in particular taken at Battery Green, the harbour was built, and you can count in this small photograph, at least 40 vessels. So it's not as if you've got to sit there all waiting to see a boat. They're going rapidly. When we went to war, when we invaded, we then attacked so many people. I'm trying to think, it was 1807. We went to Flushing, and we had the war there. There is a note in the diary of one of the people who travelled there. They took, I think, somewhere in the region of 30,000 soldiers, and they had a flotilla, and they had half the Royal Navy there, and there was somewhere in the region of 400 vessels sailed and up to Flushing from Portsmouth. They came up this way, picked up more boats in Harwich, and this fella notes that they sailed past Lowestoft. So at that point in I'm sure it's 1807, the people standing on the cliff of Lowestoft would have had this magnificent fleet of over 300 men of war, brigs, supply vessels, transports for the state was sailing not that far away from Lowestoft. So yeah. So anyway, again, I got off a tangent, but that's the story that I've heard. We could sort this out again when the Lowestoft Record Office opens. Fortunately, they're leaving all the street directories and what have you here. So by going through the street directories, we should be able to ascertain who's living there. They go back as far as 1868. So we should be able to ascertain who's living there. And then from that, go to the census returns and see if we can find this person in the census and get some idea of what's going on. I did try after Stephen put his photograph up. I thought, oh no, I'll have a look on the census. The problem is the 1881 census, there's a lot more houses than there were in 78, 3 years earlier, but they're numbered fairly randomly, and every time there's another census 10 years later, another 40 or 50 houses have gone up, and they changed the street number. And I've since discovered that house, when it stood there, well, it was, I think it's 109 now, number 109, and it's 2 flats. But right up until, I got a 1952 street directory, I had a look at that, and it hasn't got a number.
Oh, wow.
The numbering stopped by the house. It's as if the person who lived there, so I'm not having one of your common street numbers on my house. I think it's 109. So that's all I know about it. But house history can be a challenge. The best way to research a history of a house, your house or a house, so excuse me, if you can get your hands on the original deeds, that's really the best place to start.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's Queen's Road.
Thank you, Ivan. That's brilliant. So, Ivan, I'm just going to do a couple of comments, actually. Linda Boyce says, I was told the land was orchards before the houses were built. I don't know if she meant Queen's Road there. I guess she did or does. And then just a couple of extra comments. Carly says, loving listening to Ivan each week and learning a lot too. Very interesting. Even my mum comes and watches sometimes too. And Dick Houghton says, the market charter is thought to be still effective. No markets allowed within 8 miles of the triangle. Linda Boyce says, fascinating. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Ivan, I'm just going to do a quick kind of housekeeping. Thanks to everyone, and that's really just to say to anyone who's just joined or with us for the first time but haven't been here since the beginning of the session, you can rewind the session and watch it from the beginning, or you can just carry on watching from now and then watch the rest later on. We have done 3 more of these previous to today. This evening's will be available to watch after Ivan has finished, and the other 3 can be seen as well. So if you do enjoy it, please let us know. Please click share so more people can enjoy it, and Ivan very graciously has said if there's anything that anybody would like to know about the history of Lowestoft, Waveney, or Suffolk, or anything that Ivan knows about in terms of history, at least, let us know in the comments, and that could inform a future session. Yeah, we are actually here, hosted by the Rogue Shanty Chorus, and I'm a leader of the Rogue Shanty Chorus, which is an authentic fishing choir who meet in Lowestoft. And up until lockdown and COVID came along, we were meeting on a Tuesday evening at the Seagull Theatre in Lowestoft. Obviously, when everybody was no longer allowed to meet for the foreseeable future, we had to suspend that. And in lieu of normal rehearsals, on every Tuesday evening, we do a broadcast from the Rogue Shanty Chorus and for the Rogue Shanty Chorus. And those broadcasts started as virtual rehearsals and as a way for people to kind of stay connected instead of a normal rehearsal. And they just kind of evolved a little bit. And so if you're around on a Tuesday evening, please do tune into those. That's sea shanties, folk music, and a bit of discussion, a kind of a video podcast around any provenance that we found where songs were sung locally and had kind of local flavour to them, or Mondegreen versions based in Suffolk. But on a Monday evening, we are hosting author, historian, and local legend Ivan Bunn, and he's talking about lots and lots of wonderful and fascinating things and subjects. And as I say, 3 previous talks, and tonight is number 4. So sorry, Ivan, back to you now.
Okay. Well, I have got the final, or the second half of my History of Sparrow's Nest up, ready to go, if everybody's ready for that. To give you prior warning, to inform you that next Monday, returning to the 17th century, we've seen a little bit about, only touching on a little bit about what was happening in 17th century Lowestoft. As I've said when the first time I did this, my primary interest as a historian, and not just a local historian, but a historian in general, is the history of witchcraft in England and New England in the 16th and 17th century. I had a couple of books published about the trial of the Lowestoft witches, and since we've been mainly in the 17th century to now, 3 years before 1665 and 1662 was when these 2 old ladies were tried. And so what I intend to do in a week's time is actually to do my presentation and talk about the trial of the Lowestoft witches in the 17th century in Lowestoft. So it's one that's I thoroughly, well, I enjoy doing everything to do with the history, but it's one that gives us a fascinating insight into the mindsets and beliefs and the legal system of the 17th century England. So that's what I intend to do in a week's time. So I'll give you forewarning about that. So should we do Sparrow's Nest?
That sounds good, Ivan. Yeah.
Yeah, if you turn me off, I don't mean turn me off. I'll just move my little thing and get the thing set up. It shouldn't take me a second. I'm getting quite good at this now.
That's all right. I'm just going to mute you for a short while, Ivan, and I'm just going to do a few more comments, actually. And that is Liz Jackson. Just found this. Love it. So interesting. Well, thanks, Liz. I take no credit. It's Ivan's knowledge and kind of wonderful understanding of Lowestoft and Waveney and Suffolk and the history of it. And yeah, that word again, Karen Harris, wealth of knowledge about our town. Brilliant. Liz Jackson again, brilliant. And Maggie Clark says, would love to learn something about Kirkley in another session if possible. Well, funnily enough, Maggie, we will be. Ivan was discussing this earlier, and he said that actually Kirkley is very instrumental in the history of the town. And actually, I've done a tiny bit of research on the fishing industry of the town, and as I understand it, maybe Ivan will come onto this in a future session or this evening even. Kirkley actually was the landing point for many of the fish. So so I think absolutely we will be doing something about Kirkley at some point soon. I'm going to just feature, I wonder if we can show this No. Chris Collins just left a wonderful emoji, a witch emoji, but it doesn't. When we pull it up on the screen, it doesn't work. Okay, so. Oh yes, so Liz Jackson says, sorry, missed when Ivan is talking about Lowestoft witches. So that will actually be next week, Liz. Okay, the Monday, the 15th of June. Okay, and with a couple of little technical problems. We're hopefully bringing Ivan back to you in a moment or two, but he has gone. Hopefully he realizes and he'll come back to you. But I'll fill. That's all right. I'll fill while we're talking. What are we actually doing here? Well, this is the Road Shanty Chorus, and we are an authentic fishing choir. We have a wonderful membership of anywhere between about 30 and 50 people. We've existed for 4 or 5 years, and we meet at the Seagull Theatre in Lowestoft, or between there and when it's not available, we meet at Kessing, St Edmund's Church in Kessenland. We certainly know that we're the most easterly sea shanty or fishing choir. And what we love to do is kind of celebrate and explore the associated heritage of the fishing industry through song, through folk music and sea shanties, and the music that these communities created and celebrated and enjoyed. And obviously, when coronavirus came along to the UK, and everybody was told that actually we can't really do any non-essential public contact, that really meant that we had to suspend our project for the safety and to make sure that nobody was put at any undue risk. But on a Tuesday evening, everybody who would normally be in our shanty choir would be at the Seagull Theatre in Lowestoft, and we would be holding one of our normal rehearsals. And so, as a way just to kind of keep people connected, because very much we're about the community choir, as a way to keep people connected, we started to hold. There we go. Ivan's back now. That's fine. I'm just talking
Sorry
a bit,
about
Ivan. That's all right.
I lost the link completely. I had to log back in again.
Oh, no problem, Ivan. I've been filling graciously. You'll be glad to hear. But I'm very happy to hand back to you now. Anyway.
Okay. Is that? Can you just see the picture? Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah.
Okay. I'll just put a light out in here, and then we'll continue. Right, ladies and gents, I'm back again. That was a bit weird. I lost the complete connection. Anyway, going to pick up where I left off last week, just coming into the 20th century. And as I said, you'll be able to view the first half of this talk if you didn't see it later by going back to last week's talk, obviously. So this is the brief history of Sparrow's Nest, and we're going into the 20th century. I've just backtracked very slightly to overlap with where I finished last week. And so this is the area, the green area that was Sparrow's Nest, or it wasn't known as Sparrow's Nest then. It was the Cliff Cottage estate in October 1796. That's where I started my talk last week, and this is the area of the park in March 1906, the same area of the park today. So that's where we're going to March 1906. Why March 1906? Because it was in March 1906 that the last piece of ground was added to the park. This is where the bowling greens are today. And here's some of the advertisements about it. On the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, there you can see the official opening. And the top right-hand photograph shows you that in actual fact, there was a bowling green at the western end of the green, and there was the tennis courts down by Watload Road. The tennis courts would later be moved to the Dean's Oval. So we just go through, as I said. So this is the area. This is it. Excuse me, I got something on the screen there. That's better. So this is the last area in 1906 to be added to the park. The park itself, the Cliff Cottage Estate, as it was called, was purchased in 1897, and this bit was added. Finally, it was a separate little enclosure of 1 acre. It was added in March 1906, and of course, standing in the corner of that is the old churchwarden's cottage. This is where the churchwarden lived, one of the churchwardens, not the same ones. That I referred to in the management of the town. So this is a churchwarden's cottage there, which now, of course, is the Maritime Museum. And of course, there was no formal opening to the park. The park actually opened in 1898. It was purchased in September 1897. The estate was, and it became a public park very quickly, and the following summer it had opened as a park. The Cliff Cottage, as it was known, was converted into, well, it wasn't converted, became tea rooms, and this guy, Mr. Frank Steppings, was the guy that got the franchise to organize the entertainments in the park, and he also ran the coffee shop, the restaurant, and yeah, just checking on my screen that you can see that one. All right, yeah. So this is now and it became the in place to be seen. I'm not going to read this out again to you. If you want to know what that's about, you'll have to look at the one from last week if you don't remember this great military spectacle that took place there in 1898. It didn't take them it took them less than a year to get stuff organized. And so it became the place to be seen. So here's some very, very early photographs. The great and the good, there you had to pay sixpence in old money to get into the premises, but this is where everything was happening. This became the place to be seen. Here's one of the very fetes that they had, and that they've got on the right, you can see these wires. It's actually some sort of cycling trick act that's going across the park. But this is the place to be seen. Cliff Cottage on the left, you can see, which is now the cafe, the tea rooms. So I'll go through these quite quickly. 1908, I've just put random adverts from the Lowestoft Journal just to give a flavour of what's going on there. So you've got here 2 grand concerts for the band of the 19th Hussars. Going to perform there. They also had sort of vaudeville acts. One of the vaudeville acts was known as the Scarleteers, who apparently were quite famous, certainly in this country. There's an advert for them. And I was fortunate enough to actually find a photo. Here you can actually meet the Scarleteers. These are the vaudeville act that appeared quite regularly down at the Sparrow's Nest in the big marquee that would be erected for that purpose. The Stingarees, the Sabots, and by 1910, there's an article there on the right. Again, I'll go through these quite quick. I'm certainly not going to read them out to you. There was some criticism that the town council had paid over £10,000 to purchase that estate to make it into a park. And some people, as they always do, say that's a waste of money. But by 1910, there's an article saying about the Sparrow's Nest concerts, how well attended they are, and how they're hoping they're already beginning to break even money-wise. So these concerts were very, very important in the summer months. And of course, it wasn't long before they needed something more than just a marquee. So in July 1913, they built the theatre, or as they called it, the Grand Pavilion, and for the performers. And here's an early picture of this Grand Pavilion. Nothing much else has changed. The tea rooms are still there. There's not a bandstand there, but the Grand Pavilion is there. And as I said, it opened officially on the 7th of July, 1913. Moving on from that, the same year, there were winter gardens in Sparrow's Nest, Lowestoft. Now, these winter gardens, I don't know if you've been to Somerleyton Hall, the winter gardens, there are winter gardens at Somerleyton Hall, quite small ones now, but they were much, much more extensive than that. And from what research I did, I found that they were in the Crossley family who lived there, still there today, were finding it difficult to maintain these very ornate winter gardens that they got. So they demolished parts of them, they took them down, and Lowestoft Corporation, the town council, purchased part of the winter gardens of Somerleyton, and in 1913 erected them in the corner of Sparrow's Nest. And if you look closely at that facade, and here is, I don't know if my little red pointy thing, so here's Somerleyton Hall in 1891, and there, I hope you can see that, that's the same building that stood in Sparrow's Nest for a fair number of years, certainly through into the 1920s, if not before. Don't know if I can just take that back again so you can see I'm not telling porcupines. So that's the front of the winter gardens that were erected there. So we push on because there's quite a lot to go. And this is approximately where the winter gardens stood, as I've been able to figure out from early maps. And this wonderful, the Rose Garden, it was known as. I'm sure many Lowestoft people can remember this, with the ponds and the little bridge, and then the steps leading you down into the Rose Garden. There is the Wappleroad Road there in the middle distance. That unfortunately is all gone. Certainly it went about 20 years ago because it was so badly maintained and vandalized that it was decided the cheapest thing to do was to fill it in. And so here's part of the same area today, looking somewhat bland compared with what you would have seen and what I can remember as a lad and a young man many moons back now. By the 1920s, a rather nice bandstand had been erected in the park, and here we can see now, so you've got the Grand Pavilion, the theatre, you've got the bandstand, so it's now evolving into this main place of entertainment in Lowestoft, and it was the place to be. And then in 1936, I think it was, yes, May 1936, a more permanent stage was erected rather than a bandstand, although they called it a bandstand, was erected. And again, if you look at the Grand Pavilion, you can see that parts of that have been extended as well. And those lower parts there, I think, still exist. As Gardino, I think it is the restaurant. That 1936 grandstand was in a pretty poor state. I think it was burnt down, and with the help of the Royal Naval Patrol Service, a new one was erected in the 1990s. So the theatre, the bandstand, if you want to call it, I'd like to think more as a theatre, really. So we come forward, we'll pop back again to that in a moment. For many years after the park opened in 1898, the main entrance was on Wapplewood Road. There is a main entrance there, not just before you come to the bottom of Cart Score, or the ravine rather. But in the late 20s, early 30s, it was decided to build a grander entrance up on High Street. That's because it was easier from Lowestoft for Lowestoft people to get along there, and buses. By that time, the trams had come and gone. We had a regular bus service running along there, and so I'm assuming that it was built this nice entrance, which is still there today. I think this photograph comes from the 1950s when they had. When I was a lad, I can remember my aunts in their early 20s going to Sparrow's Nest for razzle dazzle. And of course, in the 1930s, we've gone back a bit. They had some big acts there. Paul Robeson performed there, and there was culture as well in the theatre. Here we've got Markova and Anton Dolin, who were full corps de ballet performers who were renowned throughout the world. If you Google their names, you can get information about them, Markova and Anton Dolin. And so there's Paul Robeson there, and I think it was about 1934, 35 he was there. Markova and Anton Dolin, here they are. They performed on the stage there as well. Again, I could give a talk if I did the research through the Lowestoft journals about the many and varied acts that took place on the Sparrow's Nest, but I don't intend to do that. And of course, Elsie and Doris Waters were booked and had arrived in Lowestoft in 1939 to perform at the Grand Pavilion, the theatre, but war was declared, and very shortly after, the Royal Naval, the Admiralty, took over the Sparrow's Nest for the Royal Naval Patrol Service, HMS Europa, and it became the headquarters of HMS Europa. I'm not going to talk about HMS Europa tonight. There are others in this town who are far more competent to give you the details of HMS Europa. I could do a thumbnail sketch, but that's not the point tonight. So HMS Europa, headquarters of the Royal Naval Patrol Service, over 68,000 sailors passed through Lowestoft in the Royal Naval Patrol Service during the Second World War, and Sparrow's Nest became there. So here's the Cliff House as it was in the 1890s before it was purchased. This would become tea rooms, and of course, here's the same view when the Royal Naval Patrol Service, taken, I think, from the bandstand, and you'll see that the old house has actually had very hastily erected utility buildings round it to give more office space, presumably. So I'll come back to that in a little while. So here's just a few of the men. Another view here. Again, you can see Cliff House wasn't demolished. It just had other buildings slapped in front of it on the eastward side. Again, we come back to that in a moment. So here's the faces of many, just a few of the thousands and thousands and thousands of men that passed through Sparrow's Nest. After the war, the park was as popular as ever. I think the pavilion actually became a barracks, a dormitories for many of the sailors who were stationed there. So here's a nice coloured postcard from the 1950s. Because by that time, the electricity had been installed fully, and that the park is illuminated. It's still this wonderful park. The house, Cliff House, round which in front of which the Royal Navy had slapped another building, was demolished in November 1963 because it was becoming very, very dilapidated. Parts of it were certainly dated from the early 17th century, if not before. Quite interestingly, there is a legend that there's a secret tunnel from the basement of this house, from the cellars of this house, that take you through to St. Margaret's Church. When I grew up in the town, I was told that it was dug by Oliver Cromwell's soldiers when they came to the town in 1643. Interestingly enough, there's a report in the newspaper that when they stripped this old building down, up in the roof, up in the loft, long since forgotten, they found the remains of a Cromwellian soldier's uniform, his boots, his helmet, and his leather jerkin in a corner. So I don't know about a secret tunnel. I've never been able to find evidence of one there. We won't go down the secret tunnels tonight, literally and metaphorically. That's a subject on its own. But it looks as if that the Cromwell, who stayed in the town with his men for 3 days and nights, might have billeted some of his soldiers in what would become Cliff Cottage. So this is demolished in 1963. And unfortunately, in 1993, the Grand Pavilion, the theatre, had to be demolished. It was just beyond well, I don't know. I don't know if politics played a part in it or what, but they didn't have the money. The council didn't have the money to maintain it. The park was becoming run down. It had lost its pizzazz, and it was decided to demolish. And certainly, it was in a bad state. I went to see a concert there October the 26th, or is it 27th, 1987. They had Steel Eye Span on there, would you believe? That was the night of the great hurricane that hit us, and it was quite farcical in a way, because there was so much rain coming through the roof above the stage that the Steel Eye Span had to stop playing at times, and they had to keep moving their electrical boxes and stuff away because of the rain coming through the roof. But so that's a personal memory I've got. So here's Cliff Cottage in its heyday. You remember me telling you last week, if I was here, that there was a fresh spring of water that was advertised that came out of the cliff into that conservatory that you can see to the left of Cliff Cottage. The old lady who lived there, Mrs. She wasn't married, Margaret Davy, she would sell penny bottles of this spring water to local people to bathe their eyes, because it was meant to be very beneficial to your eyes. So here we have a fairly a modern view of the building that stands there today. So you can see to there, that's the original main entrance to Cliff Cottage. Here's the balcony. Here's the curved wall of the old cottage there. Here are the Royal Naval buildings that were slapped hastily up against the other Cliff Cottage. And so when they demolished the cottage, they had to leave parts of the cottage standing, particularly the main entrance, because it was supporting the later naval buildings. And so that's really the only front door without a house in the country. And if you go through there, through that doorway, there's a closer view of the doorway. That's the original front door, the grand entrance to Cliff Cottage. That's all that's left of the cottage, but not quite. if you go inside, so you can see, in actual fact, some of the original brickwork. You can see where windows have been blocked up. You can see some of the original brickwork of the original cottage here. And again, this is walking through the doorway and turning to your left. If you turn to your right, the stairway takes you up to the Royal Naval Patrol Service Museum, but I don't know how clearly you can see it. Sorry about that, hit the wrong button. I'm good at that. Right, hit the right one this time. So here is the original east wall of Cliff Cottage, with the Royal Naval Patrol Service Museum above it, and with the coffee shop below it, the toilets and what have you. But here you can quite clearly see the remains of the original wall of Cliff Cottage. If you turn round, in the corner, it's fairly overgrown now, and walk right up into the corner there where this piece of low brick wall is. You can see this is the original spring that flowed into the conservatory when it was Miss Davy had it, Margaret Davy had it, and it's still there today, flying quite copiously down that black pipe that you can see. So if you've got anything wrong with your eyes, you can get in there and get some water and bathe them. You might find they get better, but don't blame me if they don't. So there's the demolition of theatre. The last little bit of theatre that still sits there is that little building there, which was the Cine Club, which is now the Film Society's building. That was, I think, dressing rooms, something added on to the original theatre. So the theatre would have stood in here. Gardenia, the restaurant, is just there. So that's the park as we know it today, and it's still, in my opinion, a jewel in the crown of North Lowestoft. And having said that, with my voice slowly running out, that's the end of the second part of the talk about the Sparrow's Nest. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ivan, very much. And let's just bring you back on screen. There we go. I'm just going to feature a few more comments, actually, Ivan, because we've had several more since you've been talking. One was from Liz Jackson. She says, "Sorry, missed when Ivan is talking about Lowestoft witches." I think I answered that, but if not, and for anybody else who's interested, it will be next week. So it'll be Monday.
I'll definitely do that. I'm just getting myself sorted out here.
Brilliant.
I will definitely do that. Do you like my tie?
Very nice tie, Ivan. Yeah. Again, you put me to shame.
That's the only chance I get of dressing up these days.
So I'm going to put another comment on screen, and this is from D. Smy. Is it Smy or Smee? "Hi, Ivan. Love your talks. Chris and I have been on your walks and attended various talks. I would enjoy hearing more on Pakefield. Thanks, D." So maybe in a future session. Then several other comments. Jill Anderson says, "Very interesting." Chris Collins liked your comment about Steel Eye Span. Obviously a Steel Eye Span fan. And then Janice Mard.
I'll tell you a quick anecdote about that. It was the night of the Great Hurricane, October 1987, and there was. I went down into the bottom gate. I had my son and my daughter and my wife who was with me, and we'd gone up to the Steel Eye Span people afterwards and said, "Do you have a poster?" And they said, "No, I'm sorry, we don't." We stood outside the bottom gate. The wind was howling, the rain was horizontal, and they turned round, and one of their huge posters was on the board outside. The rain had got behind it, and it was peeling off. So I quickly peeled it off the notice board. I rolled it up and took it home, wet, laid it out on the working top in the kitchen. And I got a friend of mine who did that sort of thing. He flattened it, dried it, and kept it well preserved. And it now hangs up above my dining table in the other room.
Wow.
So that's my band experience.
Ah, wow. So I've got another comment here. Ivan, any chance that that spring could have been somehow connected to the stream which ran beside the footpath down the ravine?
Yes, there is. Again, if you get a chance to get a copy, I've actually written an article for the Gunton Residents Association. They have a quarterly magazine, or is it a half-yearly magazine? I was invited to write a article of my own choice, about 1,000 words about the history, and I've actually written a history of the springs in that area, based on written and documentary primary sources about how the springs, why they might be there, where they came from, etc., etc. There is a horrendous spring line there. It runs down the ravine. There's another one comes out the bottom of Cart Score. There's the one at the back of the old Cliff Cottage that I showed on there. There's another one below the lighthouse. If you got into Arnold Walk, there's 2 more springs in Arnold Walk. And there are springs all over this town. And I think that's possibly why there was a fair number of small breweries here in the 17th century, because of the copious water supply. But yeah, there is a connection between all those.
Brilliant.
But if you the Gunton magazine hasn't come out yet, but if you can get a copy, there's my article in there.
Wonderful. Thank you. So a couple more comments as well. One from David Woods, 3 claps. So not just 2, not 1, but 3 claps. Linda Boyce says, thanks, Ivan. And Karen Hollingsworth says, watching from Mansfield, Nottinghamshire. Fond memories of Sparrow's Nest. Thank you. Very interesting talk. Carly says, oh, wow, I loved it about the second half of Sparrow's Nest. And Maggie says, learned a lot. I didn't know about Sparrow's Nest. Thank you, Ivan. And I'm just going to go to one other comment, Ivan, because if I can find it now, Liz Jackson says, we took over the Lord Nelson pub a couple of years ago and want to find the history of the pub and the surrounding areas. Where is best to start, please?
Which Lord Nelson? The one at the end of Devon Street?
Well, maybe you could confirm that, Liz. She didn't say, just said Lord Nelson pub.
Must be that. I don't think there's any more now. There used to be a Lord Nelson somewhere along Victoria Road as well, didn't there? But she can't have taken over that one because it's been pulled down. So that was a stupid question on my part, really.
So, I mean, I guess when the record office reopens, would that be a place to start?
That'll be the starting point there. You can start getting the names of people who lived there. I've got a fair bit of information about the area. There was actually another pub beside that, if my memory serves me right. I'll have to check that out, but I'm sure there's another pub incorporated into the Lord. If that's the one on the corner of Trafalgar Street and Norwich Road. Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll get an answer from Liz on that before the end of the session, or if you miss it, Liz, you can message the page, and Ivan can come back to it next week or in a future week. So I'm just trailing this across the bottom of the screen now, but as you mentioned earlier, Ivan, and there's a lot of interest already in this, but in next week's session, which is Monday the 15th of June, Ivan will be talking about the history, the Lowestoft witch trials, of which I don't think there's probably a more appropriate expert around. So we'll definitely look forward to that. I'm just wondering if there's any more comments just coming in, sneaking in before we finish. Now, Janice has said, I'm not sure what she means by this, but she's put the Lord Nelson, Maureen Meadows. I don't know if that's some private jaunt that they've had between them, but Janice is one of our Rogue Shanty Chorus members, so maybe we'll find out at some point. I don't know. But I mean, I guess, aside from that, we just want to, there's a lot of comments coming in saying, thanks, Ivan. There's a lot of claps, learned a lot I didn't know, but we'd like to add to that as well. And I'll say thank you to Ivan. If you are just catching this, or if you haven't caught the whole session or the whole talk, you can watch again. Or if you enjoyed it and you want to watch again, you can watch again. So please do. But in the meantime, we're going to be back next Monday. Tomorrow night, Paul and myself will be here, 7:30 p.m. doing our shanty sessions, which is folk music and sea shanties and a bit of information about them. But next week we'll be here with Ivan again. And thank you, Ivan. Do you want to take the last words, Ivan?
Yeah. I won't say much more. I'm ready for a cup of tea. Yeah, thanks everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it interesting. It's been really been locked up here. Well, I'm not locked up, I do go out, but having no outlet, all the talks and walks that I've got booked and planned for this year have all been cancelled. So it's quite cathartic, is that the word? Anyway, it's quite good for me to be able to sit here and do what I'm doing. I am really enjoying these, even though I can't see any of it, except I have to keep looking at Stephen. But anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in and watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you've got any comments, ping them through to Stephen, and we'll pass them on to there. And I might do a little bit of background research into Lord Nelson, so we got something else to talk as well as pictures next week. Brilliant. Anyway, thanks everybody. Stay well, go well, and stay safe. Bye.
Yeah. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye now. Bye.